So all the things which we have just discussed now, they were just forming the part and your understanding that why we are discussing this slide. So that is the objective of this discussion. So what we are going to discuss now is that information need storage. How do we store that thing? So here we have two things. One is when we are writing the program, then we need storage, and when our program is complete, we want to save the output, that is the storage. So when we save the output in some permanent storage, that we will be handling in file handling later on. But the things when we are doing the processing, then we need to understand how to store that information and do the processing. So that is part of this slide. So we will discuss about stored program concept, and processing needs some temporary storage. That is the purpose. So first we discuss what is data type. So for example, you take somebody who is citizen of India. You take any human being. How do you identify that human being? Because some information is associated with that human being, and that information you want to store. For example, it can be Aadhaar number, or it can be name or address. So this is the information in real world which you want to store. And there are operations also which that human being can perform. So you also identify those operations and you write program or instructions to perform those operations if you want to automate that activity. So they can be that human being can talk, human being can walk, and it can read, run, teach, like that it can happen. So if you see in real world, there are many situations in which different type of data are there, or you can say the information which you can represent. For example, you want to store 300. So 300 is integer number. In mathematics also you sometimes have real numbers, sometimes you have integer numbers. So, but in programming language, how do we store that number? So we need to identify. You also have real number. Suppose you want to print the mark sheet of a student and with percentage. So percentage will always come in real number, although it may be an integer, but again you will use 00 after the decimal part. So how do you store that value? Because real number is different, integer is different, and whatever we are designing here, that is everything is in our control. So there should be some mechanism in which we are able to store these numbers. So sometimes what happens, you want to store the characters, okay, and sometimes this may be the situation that you are asking a question and you just want whether it is true or false, or you want to know the state of any person, that are you able to talk, yes or no. Only these are the two responses you can give. So in these situations you have to understand how do we store it. Okay, for example, apart from these things, you want to store the list of roll numbers of students. So how do you store that thing? That is also information. You want to store name of somebody. Okay, how do you store that thing? Okay, so some list you also want to store. List can contain same type of element, or it can also contain different type of element. So how do you store same type of element? How do you store different type of elements? So that thing also needs to be understood, or learn how to implement that thing in our C programming language. Then you can also store name also, addresses also, because addresses contain both the things. Integer address means integer things like your flat is 1604, okay, and then third floor, fourth floor. So you have some numerical things and you also have some character or some words. So how do you store that thing? So you need data representation of that thing also in your program. So all these things under data representation. But here we are only going to discuss the primary data types like integer, real number, character, and boolean. These things we are going to discuss. So C provides us these basic data types which we can use to store our information and do the processing. So it provides char. Here C is capital, although C is not capital. Okay, that is typing mistake. So char is actually representation or to store one character at a time. Okay, so if you are using char, then you can store one character. If you want to store integer value, then you will use int. If you want to store real value, then you will use float. But if your number of real number is very large, then you will write double. These are actually data types, but they are also keywords. Keywords means language has already provided these words to you to use in some context. So you cannot use these things when you are writing the program on your own, whatever specific things you are writing. So they are already provided. So language is providing you. So you should not use them as your variable name or something like that. So when you say the side by side, the size is also given. That character size is 1 byte. It will take in the memory. Integer will may take depending on the architecture. It may take sometimes 2 bytes. Somewhere it can take 4 byte. Somewhere it can take 8 bytes. So it depends on the your computer system architecture or the CPU instruction size. How much will be the size of this integer? Okay. So we will discuss that thing here only. Then float takes your 4 byte, but it store your real numbers. Then you have double, which takes 8 bytes, but it is used only when you have a real number which is beyond the range of the float number.